practicing on your own. We're not going to cover policy priorities on today's webinar. That's actually going to be on the webinar on March 25th at 3 p.m. And that is going to go over specific talking points for the April 1st Capitol Hill Day meetings. I think so. You'll want to make sure you attend that as well if you're planning on doing those Capitol Hill Day visits. So like I mentioned, we're going to do just a pretty quick overview of the legislative process. So, Sophie, if you could, great. So there are 3 branches of the federal government, the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. Today, we're going to be looking at the legislative branch, known as Congress, and the executive branch, known as the White House, the administration, or the president. So Congress is made up of 2 chambers, the House of Representatives and the Senate. The House of Reps has 435 voting members, plus delegates who represent U.S. territories and the District of Columbia, but they don't actually have voting rights in Congress. Representatives are elected to 2-year terms, and each state gets an allocation of representatives based on their population. And so actually we're going through a reassessment. It happens every 10 years after a census is conducted. So that's going to be happening this year. And then the second chamber is the Senate, which is a smaller body comprised of 100 voting members elected for 6-year terms. Each state has 2 senators. Again, there's not one for DC or the territories. And if you are doing Capitol Hill Day, you're going to probably be meeting with your representative and your 2 state senators. Or sorry, your 2 US senators. Sorry about that. So let's go over fairly quickly how a bill becomes a law. So the 2 bodies of Congress are responsible for creating laws, and I'm going to turn it over to Sophie so she can walk you through the process.
Thanks, Tori. Understanding how a bill becomes a law is very important so you know where in the legislative process you can have the most impact. So for a bill to become a law, the first step is for the bill to be introduced, which can only be done by a member of Congress. Ideas for bills can come from the member themselves, the president, individual citizens, organizations, or companies. The president may put forth a plan, but it's always a member of Congress that submits the actual bill. Member of Congress will take the bill idea and introduce it into their respective chamber. At that point, it receives a bill number and is posted on congress.gov. If you want to follow a bill's progress, you can track them at that website. Once the bill has been introduced, it then goes to committee. Both the House and the Senate have committees on a range of topics. Some committees that NLIHC pay close attention to are the Senate Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee, the House Financial Services Committee, the Appropriations Committees, the House and Senate Committees on Veterans Affairs, the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, and the House and Senate Committees on Budget. Committees are led by the committee chair and the ranking member. The committee chair is a member of the majority party, and the ranking member is the committee leader of the minority party. So currently, the chair of each committee in both the House and the Senate is a Democrat or an independent, and in both bodies, the ranking member is a Republican. In committee, the bill is edited, also known as marking up, and then the committee decides if it will go to the House or Senate floor to be voted on, or if it will stay in committee. Most bills die in committee, meaning that they are never brought to the floor. Bills can also die after passing out of committee if the House or Senate leadership never schedules them for a floor vote. The Speaker of the House is Nancy Pelosi, and the Senate Majority Leader is Chuck Schumer. When a bill goes to the floor, members of Congress can speak for or against the proposed bill before the final vote. In the House, the Rules Committee determines how much time people can debate the bill, if amendments can be passed, and other things like that. For a bill to pass in the House, it requires a simple majority. In the Senate, members can take over a debate on the Senate floor in order to prevent a vote on most bills. This is known as filibustering. The Senate can end a debate with a vote passed by 60 members. When the debate is closed and the bill is ready to be voted on, a simple majority is needed for it to pass. More and more often, filibustering is used as a way to prevent legislation from being passed. Once the bill passes in each chamber, a conference committee made up of House and Senate members meets to reconcile any differences between the two versions of the bill. The conferenced bill then goes back to both chambers where it gets voted on again. If it passes, it goes to the president. The president has then two options. He or she can sign the bill, or he and she can veto it. There are multiple ways a bill can be vetoed, which we won't get into on this webinar. If the president decides to veto a bill, Congress needs a 2/3 majority in both the House and the Senate to override the veto. Something you may have heard about recently is budget reconciliation. So budget reconciliation is a special process that makes legislation easier to pass in the Senate. Budget reconciliation is a complicated process, which we won't go into today, but it's important to know two things. One, that not all types of legislation can be passed through budget reconciliation. Only legislation that affects federal spending and revenue. And two, that it is not subject to the filibuster. This is how the COVID relief package, the American Rescue Plan, was passed, just barely. And we think that this is the process that Democrats will use to pass an infrastructure package. Now that we've gone over how a bill is passed, it's time to discuss the budget process and where your input in this process is needed. I'll turn it over to Olivia.
Thanks, Sophie. So there are two types of spending in the budgetary process, mandatory and discretionary. Mandatory spending is automatically devoted to a program. Congress has little control over mandatory spending, and examples include Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security. Discretionary spending is subject to an annual approval process by Congress. So the budget process starts when the president submits a detailed budget request for the coming fiscal year, which begins on October 1st. The president's request is supposed to be made by the first Monday in February, but that rarely happens. After the president submits their budget, each chamber of Congress analyzes it and sets their own broad spending goals, known as a budget resolution. Any differences between the House and Senate proposals are then worked out in conference committee. The budget resolution for the year is adopted when both chambers pass the proposal. The Congressional budget resolution is not an ordinary bill and therefore does not require presidential approval. After passing the budget resolution, the House and Senate Appropriations Committees divide the discretionary spending between 12 subcommittees. And each subcommittee covers a different set of agencies, like the Subcommittee on Transportation, Housing and Urban Development, and the Subcommittee on Agriculture, Rural Development, and Food and Drug Administration. So each of these subcommittees drafts an appropriations bill, which sets the funding for each agency. Any differences between the House and Senate bills goes to a conference committee and then to each chamber of Congress. If passed in both chambers, each bill goes to the president to sign. As far as timeline, Congress must pass and the president must sign appropriations bills by October 1st, the beginning of the fiscal year, to fund all the national government's departments, agencies, and programs for the following year. Congress has actually not passed all 12 appropriations bills before October 1st in more than 20 years. So this means that some agencies and programs don't have the money that they are authorized to spend. In other words, there'll be no money to spend on some legally established programs and national government functions. And when this happens, the government either shuts down or Congress kicks the can down the road by passing a continuing resolution, or a CR, which temporarily extends current funding for programs and agencies that have not had appropriations bills passed and signed. Basically, a CR is a temporary budget extension that allows for more time for debate. Before 2020, the budget was subject to caps from the Budget Control Act of 2011. And since the Budget Control Act expired, budget caps are no longer in place. This presents new opportunities to advocate for significantly higher housing and community development programs for the first time in almost a decade. So let's talk about the budget for agencies and their programs. Housing programs rely on increased funding just to maintain their programs. So it's really important to focus our advocacy efforts on the budget. NLIHC, our state partners, and our members engage Congress each year to make sure that affordable housing and transportation programs receive the highest amount of funding possible through sign-on letters and in-person meetings. And though we've seen gains in the last 10 years for both tenant-based and project-based rental assistance funding, funding levels for key HUD programs have decreased since fiscal year 2010. The hardest hit HUD programs, as you can see, have been Section 811, Housing for Persons with Disabilities, and 2 block grant programs, the Community Development Block Grant, or CDBG, and Home Investments Partnership Program, or HOME. So now I'll hand it back over to Tori for questions.
Great, thanks, Olivia. So that was a lot of information that we kind of just threw at you, and a lot of like dense information. So we'd love to just take a few minutes to see if folks have questions. So we're definitely going to give you all a chance to ask questions throughout the webinar. You can put your questions in the chat. You can, and you can also virtually raise your hand. And since this is a meeting, you can actually unmute yourself too if you have a question and ask it that way. So does anyone have questions? Okay, so can you explain how the filibuster kills a bill? Not sure how talking for a long time does that. That's a really great question, Calpurnia. So basically, there needs to be a vote of 60 out of 100 members in the Senate to end the filibuster. So if they can't get to that vote, which then when they end the filibuster, then they can vote on the actual bill. And they need a simple majority once the filibuster ends, but they have to end the filibuster in the first place. So I can get stuck in that process. That's where it gets complicated. So great question. Thank you for that. And yes, Maureen, the recording of this webinar will be available later. There is a lot of information, I agree with you. So yes, and we're gonna send out the slides as well. Is the elimination of budget caps the same as eliminating pay-go, or are they separate things? I'm not sure. I don't know, Olivia or Sophie, or I think Joey's on. If I don't think they're the same thing, but I could be wrong about that.
Yeah, I think we can follow up just to make sure that we're giving you the correct and most accurate information. So we'll follow up on that question. Great question.
Yeah, that is a great question. And then will the utilization of HOME for the distribution of the most recent housing stimulus inhibit advocacy efforts to direct more funds to the program? Oh, that's interesting. So basically you're asking, since HOME is going to be used to distribute the stimulus money, is that going to then affect our advocacy for increasing money to HOME in the future? That's a good, I would not think so, because the COVID relief is separate, but Joey, I see, is unmuted and may answer this question.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in on this question. I will say, in our March 25th webinar, we're going to get into some of the finer details about specific programs, but discussing advocacy overall, it's definitely true that some members of Congress will feel if a program has recently been given a lot of resources, there's no need for more. And this is why it's so important that all of the federal expenditures that make it to housing programs are really well administered, and they make effective use of their dollars very quickly, because it can be a liability in advocacy when certain housing programs have a lot of money sitting around and sort of not being used. So we're talking today about advocacy as it relates to our message to members of Congress. But another important piece of advocacy for people at the state and local level is making sure that when Congress steps up and commits resources, that those resources are being used effectively and expediently.
Great, thanks, Joey. I see a lot of awesome questions in this chat. I am going to move on and we can go back to them. I just want to make sure we get to the content and have a little bit of time so you guys can kind of go over some of the strategies that we talked about.
Also, Tori, just as Sophie mentioned, I'm taking down some of the questions from the chat. So even if we don't get to them on this webinar, we can be sure to include any of that in materials we send out.
Yeah, I also see someone asked if we could send out a PDF of this, and yeah, we can definitely do that. Okay, so let's go into thinking about how we advocate. So While all lobbying, so first we're going to talk about advocacy versus lobbying, just so everyone's on the same page with that. So basically, if you're not taking a position on a specific piece of legislation, you aren't lobbying. Anyone can participate in advocacy, whether you're an individual or you work for a nonprofit. I think a lot of times people get confused. They think advocacy is lobbying, and that's just not the case. So lobbying requires 3 components: communicating with decision makers, like elected officials and their staff, communicating about existing or potential legislation is the key term, so like bills, and asking for the decision maker to vote for or against that legislation. So all 3 components are needed to count as lobbying. Sometimes people assume because they worked for a 501c3 can't lobby. In fact, 501c3s can lobby if it fits within their mission. So the limits to lobbying are usually established by the amount of time or resources spent on lobbying activities. So generally, if an organization exceeds 5% of staff time or overall resources on lobbying, then the organization needs to register as a lobbyist or submit paperwork so they can be incorporated under the 501H designation. But under 5%, you're fine. So the 5% standard is often called the insubstantial part test. So oftentimes people are worried if they do any advocacy work at all that they're lobbying, and that's not true. So only if you're asking an elected member of Congress to vote a specific way on a piece of legislation are you lobbying. I just want to reiterate that because, we always get folks saying, oh no, I can't do that, I can't lobby. And it's like, nope, it's not lobbying. So you can talk to your members, right? Just about why housing is needed and the importance of housing and the importance of like who benefits from these programs in general, without referencing specific legislation. So now I'm going to talk to you about your role as an advocate and how you can use your knowledge of the process to influence decision makers. So your senators and reps make decisions based on a lot of different factors. So their party is one. So if they're a member, of the Democrat Party and the party supports a bill, that might influence their decision. And right now, especially since the majority is so tight, people are going to be sticking to party lines. We saw that with the COVID relief bill that just passed. They also consider what their constituents value. So if they're hearing from folks in their district, right, that voted for them about certain issues, they're going to pay attention to that. And then whether a bill is politically and financially feasible. So they often look at how much something costs. And if that, if it doesn't have an expensive price tag, oftentimes folks are more willing to support it. If it does require a hefty price tag, then oftentimes there needs to be more of a longer term campaign to really get that legislation passed. And then it's important just to remember that as a constituent, you have a lot of power. You can talk to your member of Congress about the importance, again, of housing. And then if they don't do what you want them to do, you have the power to vote them out. And you can also say, hey, I voted for you and I don't see you supporting this. So that's always important to reference. So we get this question a lot. Does advocacy work? And the simple answer is yes, it does. I have I don't know if any PA folks are on the call, but I have an example of very recently when we were trying to get the COVID package passed back in December, the December one. We heard that a couple of senators, one in Pennsylvania, Senator Toomey, was hearing from a lot of folks, different landlords and corporations, that they were not in support of extending the eviction moratorium. We activated our network in Pennsylvania. They called Toomey. They actually clogged up his voicemail inbox. They clogged up his email inbox. They activated their entire network throughout the state in a matter of like hours. And from that effort, he backed off on trying to get the eviction moratorium extension, not included in the most recent package. So that's just a quick example of, hey, advocacy works. And when we talk about advocacy, it's not always we want to see this legislation pass. It can be, working on folks from preventing a specific piece of a bill, like I just talked about, from being included, right? So there's lots of different ways that advocacy works and lots of ways to influence your members of Congress. And so oftentimes we talk about, you know, it's important to work on a member of Congress who is a very vocal opponent of housing. And the more you talk to them and the more you kind of let them know and help them understand these programs, the more likely it is that they could move from a staunch opponent to more of a, you know, I'm not going to speak out against this, because the more vocal someone is against something, and often helps other people get on board and also be vocal against it. And then when we look at the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of getting people to support bills, it's great if they're like, yeah, housing, I get it, that's great. But we also want people to be, you know, champions. We want people to be talking to their fellow members of Congress about how great this bill is and why they need to vote for it, right? It's not enough if someone is just like, oh, okay, it's great, and then that's it. Like, we want them to work actively on getting other folks involved and on board with it as well. So that's just my little tangent on advocacy. As you can see, I'm pretty passionate about it. And I am now going to turn it over to Sophie, who's going to talk a little bit more about your meetings and how you can structure them to be the most effective. So Sophie?
Thanks, Tori. Thanks. So there are a few key things to consider about advocacy meetings. First, remember that a Hill visit is just a conversation. It happens at places of power with people that have influence, but in the end, it's just a simple conversation. Very often, the staff people or the member of Congress you'll be meeting with have less information about the issue than you do. So very often, you will be the expert in the meeting. An additional consideration I'd like you to keep in mind is that no Hill meeting is the final conversation you'll be having with a given individual. The best advocacy is advocacy that leads to building a relationship with a staff person or a member of Congress. So a Hill meeting is just one conversation in a series of conversations. Because you are building a relationship, it is helpful if you can share a real life experience of how your organization or you personally have benefited from housing programs. Also, remember to listen. Finding out what your congressperson's views are on an issue can be just as important as conveying yours, because it gives insight on how you can make your message more persuasive. With that in mind, let's talk a bit more about your meetings. For those of you attending this year's virtual Capitol Hill Day, the logistics of scheduling a meeting will vary. So some states will have captains who will set up meetings for their teams. Other smaller groups will set up their own meetings. If you don't know the plan for Capitol Hill Day, talk to your NLIHC organizer. Olivia will put a link in the chat to our field map so that you can see who your field organizer is. When scheduling a meeting, you should call the office you would like to meet with, ask for the scheduler, and ask for a visit by telephone or video conference. Some offices will ask you to fill out a form, but most of the time, a phone call will suffice. If you need help getting the name or number of a scheduler, just ask one of us. Be sure to have clear communication about if the Congressional office will set up the conference line or if you will. Please note that the meeting will take place with higher level staff if the request comes from an actual constituent and not one of NLIHC's staff. But we are more than happy to help in whatever way we can. When trying to schedule a meeting, calling about 2 to 3 weeks ahead of time is the way to go. So if you're attending our virtual Hill Day on April 1st, right now is the time to begin scheduling these meetings. I mention meetings with staff members most of the time because that's who you will be meeting with in most instances. Oftentimes meeting with staff members is just as good or even better than meeting with a representative. The member of Congress relies on their staff for key information as they make decisions. It's also true that when you meet with staff, they are more likely to have more time to explore the various issues you're discussing and to ask good follow-up questions that provide more of a dialogue. If possible, try to meet with a staff who handles housing policy, but that won't always be possible. Oftentimes, when you meet with a member of Congress, the meeting is rather brief because of their busy schedules. Also, if you can, research the member of Congress and the staff person you're meeting with beforehand. It's really great to start off the conversation saying, it's great to be meeting with you. I was happy to see that the Congresswoman voted in support of X, Y, and Z, or introduced such and such bill. It shows that you're interested in what they are doing and not only looking for them to be interested in your issues. It establishes a tone of partnership, which can be really helpful moving forward. If you're doing your meeting with a coalition or with several people presenting on different issues, you'll want to determine who will speak when, who speaks on what issues, and who makes what asks. This can involve some coordination, so we encourage you to find time to practice before the meeting. We also encourage you to practice your elevator pitch and become very comfortable with the talking points. Also, now that we're sort of in a virtual world, we ask that it's a good idea to become comfortable with the technology that you were using for your visits, and remember simple things like there might be a time zone difference between Washington, D.C. and where you live. If you're interested in learning from advocates on how they craft their elevator pitch and how they stay on message, we invite you to attend our Policy Priorities webinar, where we'll go into this in more detail. If you're attending the virtual Capitol Hill Day on April 1st, please note that we will make additional resources available online on our Legislative Action Center. You may choose to discuss 3 top issues out of the many, many that we provide for you. You may also want to discuss a couple of policy issues that are really important to you and may not be on NLIHC's policy priorities or our Hill Day toolkit. These are absolutely your meetings, so make sure to treat them that way. So these are some considerations before your meeting, and I'm going to turn it over to Olivia to share some key considerations for during your meeting.
Thanks, Sophie. And we've been talking a lot about lobbying and advocacy at the federal level. I saw a comment in the chat around how to advocate in your local community. And so some of the things I'm going to be talking about how to work during a meeting can be true also at the local level and anytime you're doing advocacy. So number 1, always introduce yourself and your organization, and if applicable, declare yourself a constituent of the member of Congress. Your effectiveness is largely based on geography because legislators are concerned about their constituents, priorities, experiences, and expertise. They're concerned with the people that are working, living, and operating in their district. So if you're not a constituent, explain how your organization works with the member of Congress or their constituents, or provides services in the district. So make it really specific and tied to their interests. You should use this meeting as an opportunity to educate your elected official or their staff about the work that you do and the issues that you care about. So remember, if your organization doesn't allow you to lobby as their representative, you can still talk about your work as informing your perspective on any given issue within the meeting. So as often as possible, when you're telling your story and you're talking about the work you do, you should provide data and experiences about the issues you're talking about. Like really bring to life what you care about and what you're talking about. Very often, this takes the shape of numbers and stories. At NLIHC, we work very hard to take national level data and calculate it and break it down to the congressional district or the local level, so that facts about the affordable housing crisis, which is happening nationally, are expressed in a way that has local context or ties to the specific district. And we'll share an example of this on the next slide. A second thing to remember is to connect your work to the elected official as much as possible. So again, be specific, talk to them about the work they're doing, and really craft your message. This is another reason that you should do research on them before your meeting. If you can connect your work on affordable housing to an elected official's interest on childcare or education or small business or more funding, that will create a key connection and will lead to a stronger relationship as you move forward. Also, third, always make an ask in your meeting. Make sure that when you talk about an issue, you connect it to the budget, a specific piece of legislation, or perhaps a Dear Colleague letter that a representative is circulating. Something that your representative can support or oppose. Make it a question where they need to give you a yes or no answer. Most often though, they'll give you an answer of, this is helpful information and we will think about it. And this is fully acceptable. You can use this as an opportunity to open the door to a follow-up conversation, set up another meeting, or offer more information. As Sophie mentioned, these meetings are just an opportunity to start a relationship and to keep this relationship going, a flow of information both ways. So using this, even if it's not a specific yes or no, as an opportunity to keep the door open can be really helpful to building that relationship. You should always make a specific ask in your meetings, but like I said, sometimes your legislator or their staff member won't be very well versed in the issue that you're talking about. And they might be considering the issue of affordable housing for the first time. In some of these instances, your meeting will probably talk about background, and you'll be providing a lot of detail on what affordable housing is and why it matters. You might not get into the finer points of the policy, and that's another reason, again, for a follow-up conversation. Lay the foundation and then follow up with specifics. So here's an example of when I say data that you can use to craft your message. This is an example of something we provide. So this is a congressional district profile that you can use to highlight the need for more affordable homes in your state and support your asks. Again, breaking down national data to a level that really means something to your elected official. As you can see on this housing profile, the top level statistics are broken down on a congressional district level. This shows members of Congress how the issue of affordable housing specifically touches their district. The second level of statistics are statewide, and the third is regional, to show statistics for metropolitan areas or counties in a congressional district. So different levels of geography to contextualize what you're saying. You can look up your congressional district profile on NLIHC's website, and we'll also drop the link in the chat. It's a really effective tool to use to talk about your message. So after your meeting, we've talked about before, we've talked about during, and after, you should send a thank you email or perhaps even do a thank you tweet or blog post. If you can, take a screenshot of your meeting so that you can include it in this follow-up. This will allow you to share about your meeting publicly. You can say something like, we're happy to meet with our legislator and discuss affordable housing issues, and we look forward to working with them in the future. Publicly expressing your gratitude for the availability of your member of Congress and their staff is a great way to strengthen your relationship, and it also reminds them that they are accountable to do the follow-up and the commitments they made to you. It keeps you fresh on their mind, and it also extends to your network the work that you're doing. It's also a great reminder for them to maybe follow up on information or questions they had or things they said that they needed answers to. Secondly, like I mentioned, you should share what you are learning on the Hill, not just for social media, but also for your network. Share with your members, your board, your volunteers, and also share with us so that we can take the information that you provide and have specific follow-up items to clarify any questions that members of Congress might have and to get them to engage on specific legislation. So at NLIHC, we're in a better position when we know the outcomes of your meetings and have a sense of what's happening on the ground. Finally, always follow up and again, work to build that relationship with the office. Make sure you're continuing the conversation. Advocacy should not be considered something you do in one meeting, but rather the process can begin with a meeting. I'm gonna hand it back over to Tori.
I'm on mute, sorry about that. Thanks, Olivia. Again, we're gonna take a quick break for questions. Feel free to put them in the chat. I did see that Colleen had a question about lobbying, which Joey had answered and Rachel had answered as well. But if you say support, oppose XYZ legislation, would that fall under the lobbying bucket? And yes, it would. So when you express a specific opinion about a specific piece of legislation, that is lobbying. Let's see, I just see one new message. Nope, okay. So I think we can move on. We do have more time for questions, so we can always come back if you have a question that comes up later. So we're gonna do some role playing right now. So because many of you may not have participated in a Capitol Hill meeting before, we want to provide a very simple role play of what a meeting might look like. And it's gonna be done by Olivia and Sophie. And we're just gonna go over like a general example, and then we're gonna break out and let you guys all kind of practice with each other. I know that Sophie sent out some materials for that. So without further ado, Sophie and Olivia.
Okay, I can go ahead and start. I'm walking into the office. Hi there.
Good morning.
I'm Olivia Arena. I'm with the Eliminating Homelessness Coalition in Texas and a constituent of Representative Smith. Thanks for meeting with me today.
Thanks for coming in. My name is Sophie Seebach, and I work as a legislative assistant for Congresswoman Smith. I'm sorry that the Congresswoman can't meet with you today herself, but I'm happy to be meeting with you and will be sure to share our conversation with her.
We are so grateful. Thank you. I'm here today to share a little bit about myself and to discuss some key housing issues with you. I put some documents that I'll be referring to in the chat because we're in a virtual Zoom world still. As I mentioned, I'm a constituent of Congresswoman Smith, and I work at the Eliminating Homelessness Coalition. I've been with the organization for 10 years, and I work closely with our resident advisory board, where residents get together to represent their interests at various public housing sites. My organization is also a member of the National Low Income Housing Coalition, a nonprofit dedicated solely to achieving socially just public policy that ensures people with the lowest incomes in the United States have affordable and decent homes. I scheduled this meeting with you to discuss my concern about the lack of affordable homes for the lowest income households, specifically the population I work with. We have had great success in Texas addressing homelessness with proven programs such as rental assistance and permanent supportive housing. But the support that we're getting from the federal government just isn't enough to house everyone experiencing homelessness in Texas.
I'm really sorry to hear about that, but as I'm sure that you know, we're in a really difficult budget environment, and we're going to have to make a lot of tough choices around really important programs.
Definitely. The budget environment is difficult. If you look at the materials I sent in the chat, there's a budget chart showing the level of funding for various HUD programs over the previous budget years. And as you can see, the support for subsidized housing programs hasn't kept pace with the needs in our communities. And while there are many people who wrongly believe that low-income people are already served by federal housing policy because there's so many vouchers and public housing units, the truth is that only 1 in 4 households that needs housing assistance actually receives it. Only 1 in 4. And due to inflation, an increase in the HUD budget is needed each year just to maintain programs at their current levels. For this reason, we really want to see an increase in affordable housing resources.
Wow, that is a very low number. Do you mind me asking, where did you get this data?
Yeah, of course. These numbers come from the National Low Income Housing Coalition and their HUD data. I want to also draw your attention to the numbers on cost burden and severe cost burden. So a household is cost burdened if they're paying more than 30% of their income on rent and essential utilities. And they are severely cost burdened if they're paying more than 50% of their income on these. As you can see, the problem is most severe as income levels get lower.
Well, the data is certainly helpful. Can I follow up if I have any questions about this?
Yes, definitely. Can I ask for the Congresswoman's support in making sure HUD is funded at the highest levels possible to ensure that everyone has a safe, accessible, and affordable home?
I know that she really values HUD, the programs that HUD operates, and we will certainly try to take a stronger stance to defend those funding levels. Unfortunately, we're in a tough budget environment, so I don't expect us to get very far beyond flat funding for programs this year, but we will certainly push to increase resources where we can.
Thank you. That's amazing. We appreciate her support and will follow up with any additional information that may be helpful to the Congresswoman. Thanks for your time.
Great. So that was an example of a pretty standard meeting, but there's a variety of things that can happen. So we urge you to be flexible. So sometimes you can have a meeting with a staff person or a member of Congress who doesn't agree with supporting affordable housing programs and has some challenging questions. And sometimes there will be some difficulty in scheduling and you won't have your meeting in the lobby of the office, like we're having virtual meetings. So just do your best to be flexible. So right now, we're gonna open it up for questions one more time to see if people have questions about how we conducted that meeting. You can put your questions in the chat or unmute yourself. Okay, so I don't see any coming in. We are going to come back after the brief practice. It's going to be very brief, so we can go over some hard questions and hear how they went. So how your visits went. So right now, like I said, you're going to do a quick visit with each other. You should have received some talking points, but Olivia is going to put them in the chat, as well as a meeting outline, some data and potential questions to ask in your meetings. We'll put you out in breakout rooms for about 5 minutes or so. And you guys can take turns playing roles. Come on. Sorry. Sorry, people got unmuted for some reason, but now you're all muted again. So like I said, we're gonna go into breakouts and then we'll come back and we'll debrief and talk about hard questions. And so now I'm gonna put you all into your room. So thanks, bear with me for a moment as I do that. And thanks for your patience. And please mute yourself. I think someone's unmuted. So if you could mute yourself, that would be great.
Unmuted, John in San Diego, or Alvin Fern, San Diego.
Oops.
Yeah, like I was put in a room, a solo room. I'm not sure if the mom is going to get the food, sweetie. Yeah, there.
Oh, sorry. You were.
So if there's one where I can just observe people, because like as an advocate who is cost burden, my daughters are actually hungry, so I'll just be listening.
Sure, no problem. Let me put you into a room. Sorry, I realized a lot of people dropped off. So yeah, let me do that. Not a lot of people, but some people dropped off. Sorry, give me 1 second. What room were you in?
I think it was.
Oh, there we go. All right, let me move you to Ruben. Hey, Sophie. Let's see. Okay, let me see.
Yeah, that one might have people that are logged on that are just not at the computer, because no one is saying anything in 11 either.
Oh, no, I'm sorry about that.
No, it's okay.
Let me move you to, sorry, I'm so sorry. So we always run into tricky issues when we try to do breakout rooms. But we're not going to be doing them for too much longer.
While we're waiting, does anybody who's still in the main room have any questions that have come up while in the time period?
Okay. What do you say, Sophie? Maybe 2 more minutes? And then we'll open it for
until
questions.
3:50. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, sounds good. So let me pause the recording. Hi all, thanks for coming back. We're still waiting for a few more, or actually I guess a lot more folks to come on back. So thanks for your patience. And then we're gonna do some debriefing to see how they went. And can take some questions from you all. We can also some hard questions too if we need to. So I think that's everybody. Okay, great. So let's debrief. So you can put in the chat, or like I said, you can unmute yourself. How did the meetings go? Did any tough questions come up that you didn't know how to answer? What went well? Joey, can I pick on Joey? I know he was in a room.
Sorry.
I was going to say, Joey, I can also jump in.
No, that's
oh yeah,
fine.
Olivia was in the room. Sorry about that, Olivia. Yeah.
Yeah, in my room we had a couple of great folks, but we unfortunately didn't have enough time for everybody to participate. But I can say that Arlene, who I was with, did an excellent job talking about her experience and what she's seeing in her community in Oakland, and providing some context on how wages and housing are really important to consider together. But it wasn't just storytelling. She used some really helpful data points. And if we have more time, I think we were going to get into pivoting on the story and the data to the legislation that would be a potential solution.
Thanks, Joey. And thank you, Arlene. Olivia, did you want to share?
Yeah, and maybe this is experience that other folks had, but in our room, we kind of just touched on, if you're not a houser, how to make the tie from whatever area you focus on, or if you're providing, like if you're working in a housing program, how to like tie it back up to the federal level. So Tori or Sophie or others on the call, like what are some good solutions for like making, I guess, bridging from another area into housing and making the case for housing?
That's awesome. Yeah, Deborah, do you have a comment or answer to Olivia's question?
No, I have a comment. I was in a room, just two of us, two newbies, didn't know what they were doing.
Oh no.
Yeah, but we did end up finding out we had a lot in common. I used to live in California. She has a relative that went to college that's right in my backyard. So we managed to figure out we know what each other's doing.
That's great. Sorry about that. Yeah, it was a random place.
That's quite all right. That's quite all right, because I had no idea how to do this.
Well, so this is where the field team comes in. So Olivia, if you want to maybe share that map again, but you can also maybe share our emails directly because Deborah, where are you located? Well, sorry, what was that?
What did you say?
Where are you located?
I'm in Sarasota, Florida.
Great. So Kyle is your advocate.
Yeah, I know that.
He can touch base. Okay, cool. So we can practice with you. If people are, after today, we're like, oh God, I am so overwhelmed. I don't know how I'm going to do this. Please, we're also going to follow up with the email. So in the follow-up email, you can respond and say like, I want to connect to my field organizer and practice. We'd be happy to do that with you. And then also, so if you are going to a meeting by yourself or doing one maybe with one other person, we always go with people to their meetings in the past that want them. So the advocacy field team and policy team were available to go and attend those meetings with you to provide support. We often don't say a lot. We want you to kind of lead those conversations, but we will help and provide any input that we need to. I see Hadisha Sims, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, this is actually Nakia. That's my daughter, Hadassah.
Oh, Nakia, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. A lot of us at the end. Yeah, my question is Bridget back? I think I sent her an email. I'm in Texas, and I think I sent her an email and it indicated she would be out. Is she back?
Brooke. Oh, yeah. So Brooke is not.
Brooke.
She's
sorry.
No, that's okay. She's out till the end of the month. But Joey, I know, is helping with connecting with folks in those areas. And we can definitely connect with you after this call as well to make sure that you're on track for your meetings. And then I just see a question from Rachel about sometimes you can use data to bridge seemingly unrelated topics. What makes these things connect for you? So the more authentic and personal the exchange, the better relationship that will be built. Yeah, that's definitely a great point and great recommendation. Oftentimes, you know, we have our whole Opportunity Starts at Home campaign where folks talk about the area, you know, so folks maybe in the healthcare sector talk about how housing is connected to health, how, you know, having a home, if you have a home to put your insulin, you can store your insulin in the refrigerator, take better care of your health through that way. So there's a lot of connections to bridge the gap between other sectors and housing, and to talk about what you see on your day-to-day. You know, when I was in a homeless shelter, I had to take people to the hospital when they had stomach sickness, and instead of being able to take them to their home. And so I just was like, how is this a good way to deal with, you know, folks that are, you know, that don't have homes? Like, this is awful and they should have homes. So, you know, talking about your own personal stories and what you see on the day-to-day is always really greatly appreciated from folks. So I think we're gonna move, if there's no other, I just see some comments in the chat. So yeah, we'll send out the state data in the chat and then the follow-up emails. I'm just quickly looking at this. So we have a few more slides to get through. So we want you to know, where are we right now? Okay. I don't think we have time to do difficult questions, Sophie. So we're gonna send the difficult questions out in the follow-up email with ways that you can respond to those difficult questions. Like we've been saying, the next webinar that will help you with Lobby Day is March, nope, that's not right, is March 25th. It's a Policy Priorities webinar at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You will hear from the field team, the policy team, and advocates. And they will say, like, here's how we use our experiences to talk about the asks. And I think it's going to be really great. We're really excited. And we're going to have people from not only in the housing world, we're going to have residents, people in the housing world, and then people in other sectors be on and share their experiences and how they connect that data to what they see on the ground. And then before we end today's webinar, we're a membership organization. We always encourage folks to become members. It helps us when we go on Capitol Hill and say we have X amount of people in our network. It always looks great to be able to say that to the folks that we meet with. And lastly, here is our contact information for the field team. So like I mentioned, we'd be happy to run through dialogue, through conversations with you, help you practice before your meetings. Also connect with you if you want us to attend your meetings for Capitol Hill Day. We love to do that sort of stuff. And so you can jot down the contact information and feel free to reach out to us. And yeah, thank you again for attending. This was great. Hope you got something out of this webinar, and we will see you in a couple weeks for Lobby Day, or Capitol Hill Day. Sorry, I keep saying Lobby Day, for Capitol Hill Day, and for our Policy Priorities webinar. So thanks everyone. Have a great one.